So now we're going to look at a specific way to use the sequence text behavior. I have some text in this project, and I have a little animated background that comes from Motion's library. It's just a piece of animation straight from the library. And I have this quote, "The gold is in the iron," which is a quote from a Hardy Boy book because I'm reading the Hardy Boys to my son. Now, what we want to do, though, is make this text appear from a set of random characters. So this is about randomizing text or unrandomizing text. And while there are many, many presets, as we've seen in the library, behaviors, text sequence, and in fact, if we were to type in random in the search field here, we'd see there's a variety of different, there's fade characters, random in and out, peak random in and out. But if you select any of those, that's not what I'm looking to do. I'm not looking for a random animation of the characters. I want the characters themselves to change. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to select this text layer, and then I'm going to add the sequence text behavior. Now, instead of going into, let's actually get rid of the search field here. Instead of going into text animation and dragging this text sequence behavior, I'm going to go down here in the toolbar to the behaviors pop-up menu and choose text animation, sequence text. Then I'm going to trim it down to, I don't know, about 3 seconds long. O. Option Command O to set a play range. And by default, as we know, it does nothing. I'm not going to use this adjust item tool because I don't really care about its position right now. Check this out. I'm going to go to the inspector, and let's close the controls for a minute and focus here on the parameters that we want to add. I'm going to go to the format section and choose this one called character offset. This is a very interesting parameter. So I'm going to select it, and by default it's set to 0. So if we play, if I just scroll, you'll see nothing happens to the text at all. But if I move it, let's just move it to 1. Okay, so now notice I moved the playhead a little bit and it updated, and now it looks like it's completely different. It says home, but every character is only one letter different from what it was at the beginning. For example, the changes to a U, UT, H changes to an I, the E changes to an F, sorry, TU, it's all one letter later. Gold, so G changes to an H, the O changes to a P, okay, and so on. So every letter is shifted one to the right, and it creates what looks like random text. So the farther up I drag this, I'll go up to something like 14, and then move the playhead to update, and we get something completely different. But now if we play, in fact, let's turn off this background animation just so we can focus on what the text is doing. The text all animates to reveal kind of the hidden message, the gold is in the iron. And it kind of goes one character at a time. Now notice how the text is kind of bumping around as it's doing it, shifting left and right. The reason that it's moving around is that the text, every single font has a different amount of width that it fills up. So as the fonts change, or as each character changes, it's taking a different width, and you get this bouncing effect. Doesn't look that good, but we can fix that. So let's check this out. If I go to the text inspector, notice I'm using a font called Koritaki, which comes from the Final Pro 10 collection. If you remember earlier, we took all the fonts from Final Pro 10 and we added them in to Motion. And I'm using one of those fonts. You can see here the list of all of them called Koritaki. Now, instead, I'm going to go to a different collection. Check it out. There's a collection that I didn't create. You'll have it by default yourself, called Fixed Width. This collection is full of fixed width fonts. Now, your collection may not look the same as mine because I've installed a bunch of third-party fonts in here. I'm going to select this one called LCD Mono because it has kind of a digital look to it. Now, because it's a fixed width font, check this out. When we play it, there's no shifting around of the characters. They stay perfectly still. And you can use any of the fonts in this collection to do that. Or when you look up and download fonts, you can look up fixed width fonts, and they'll do the same thing. So now that we've got this, each letter is animating pretty much separately, but we know how to adjust that, right? We'll go to the Behaviors Inspector, we'll open up the controls, and we'll go down to the spread. Let's do something like a 6. And now we have more letters animating at a time, but it's going from the beginning to the end. I'd rather have them randomly. Instead of starting at the first letter and working through, let's go down to the direction and set it to random. And now we have a more random animation of these letters coming on. Let's turn our background back on. And we kind of have a cool little animation of some random text then revealing kind of a secret code. Now we can take this a little bit further. For example, let's increase the size of the text a little bit. In fact, instead of leaving this behavior tab where I'm working, I'm just going to press F7 to bring up the heads up display and select the text. And that way I can increase the size of the text here, and I still have all of my behavior settings here. I didn't lose them. That's one nice thing about using the heads up display is you don't lose what's in the inspector. So now that's bigger, I'm going to go to this section here at the top and choose to add format rotation. And I'm going to pop open rotation because I just want to rotate them on their y-axis, let's say 180 degrees. I'll do that and see what that looks like. Now we see each of those letters kind of flipping over as they're animating. So just another way to look at it. I'm going to set that back to 0 and try animating something else. Let's choose Add Format Scale and setting that down to 0. And now the letters grow as they animate. I don't like that as much either. I'm just going to go ahead and remove that format scale. So just some ideas that you can add different parameters and continue the process of animating in different ways. I think the final thing I might do is just change the color of the text here to be something more of a gold color perhaps. So that's one use of the sequence text behavior to create a randomized text effect.